Welcome to the Mind
What do we really mean by genius?
Matters
Giftedness is so much more than an academic label.
podcast.
We tend to think of gifted as kids being good at everything across the board.
An exploration of giftedness,
Originals are nonconformists.
creativity,
People who not only have new ideas,
intelligence,
they're the people you want to bet on.
in childhood,
I like to learn about things, but I like to learn my way.
and beyond. This is the Mind Matters podcast.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 25 of the Mind Matters podcast. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and today we're going to be talking with Chris Wiebe of Bridges Academy and 2E News. We'll talk about how to leverage the heightened abilities of twice-exceptional learners in order to let them build success. We'll be up with that in just a few minutes. The California Association for Gifted Conference is coming up at the end of this month in Palm Springs, California. We won't be there in attendance, although we do wish we could escape the Midwest for Palm Springs for a few days. But for those of you that will be there, it sounds like an awesome lineup. If you're out that direction and you haven't looked it up yet, you should check out the website and see if you might be able to attend. The website is cagifted.org. Also, this is National School Counselor Week. Shout out to all of the school counselors out there who work tirelessly to meet the needs of their students, especially to the school counselors who are listening now and advocating for high ability and twice exceptional kids on a daily basis. Take a minute to send a quick note to a school counselor you know to tell them how much you appreciate them, and maybe send them a link to the podcast while you're at it. Don't forget, if you're a loyal listener and you haven't caught up with us on social media, take a few seconds and do that. You can find us on Facebook and Insta as Mind Matters Podcast, or on Twitter, we're at Mind Matters Pod. Also, if you wanted to support our endeavors in other ways, you can check out our Patreon account, which is patreon.com/mindmatters. On today's episode.
My name is Chris Wiebe, and I'm the high school director at Bridges Academy, which is in Studio City, and it's a school for twice-exceptional students. And I'm also the managing director of 2enews.com.
Stay with us.
If what you hear on Mind Matters makes a difference to you and your family, consider becoming a supporter. Through patreon.com, you can chip in to help defray the cost of producing this podcast. Just decide how much you'd like to contribute, and that amount will be placed on your credit card every month. Even a couple of bucks would help cover the cost of producing the podcast and help us promote it to new listeners who could also use our help. Go to patreon.com/mindmatters and become a patron. And thanks for making a difference. This is the Mind Matters podcast.
Today, we're talking with Chris Wiebe. Chris is the managing editor of 2E News and director of the high school program at Bridges Academy in Studio City, California. Bridges Academy is a school that educates gifted kids who are also twice exceptional. So, Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Bridges Academy?
Yeah, sure. Well, we actually started in 1994 as a tutorial, which you will hear a lot from schools that serve twice-exceptional students. And over the years then, I think in the late 90s, they moved into a building, and now we have a campus, a really nice campus actually, in a Studio City. And what began as really 4 students in someone's apartment who were struggling with school, turned into today we have about 180 students in grades 3 through 12. And we're a strength-based school that specifically serves twice-exceptional students. And we have a number of programs that, really reflect understanding of the twice-exceptional profile and what their needs are in an academic context, which can often be very, very different than their neurotypical peers.
So usually the kids who come to Bridges Academy are probably experiencing a lot of struggles, and that motivates their families to seek you out.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what some of those struggles are?
Well, kids can be pigeonholed very quickly, and their academic experience, catered to assumptions about them that aren't necessarily true. And 2E kids are complex, As I said, their cognitive and psychological needs can be very, very different than, the neurotypical peers. So I'd say the primary obstacle is that many schools will kind of identify a student's weaknesses and remediate, or they'll identify a student's giftedness or strength and then pursue some sort of acceleration or enrichment. Both of those models, or both of the sides of the dichotomy, I think are useful when it comes to educating twice exceptional kids, but it really is not that black and white, for obvious reasons. You have students who are, incredibly gifted, but also have some real struggles that they're dealing with. And I think a lot of schools really will approach either side of the dichotomy. I think the twice exceptional movement is really starting to gain a lot of momentum. I think schools are becoming more and more aware of that there is a really unique population whose needs are, a bit more nuanced in terms of just curriculum and instructional strategies. But I think oftentimes students were at schools that really didn't have the ability to be as nimble as you often need to be because, it's a moving target in terms of serving their needs. And, when you superimpose that over a more sequential and linear curricular approach, that can be difficult, to achieve.
Sure.
I had just a wonderful student, very, very bright, very, very high perceptual reasoning skills on the whisk, and but also a lot of defiance in there, high ADHD, and just hitting a wall in his English class, and lots of acting out, lots of behaviors, which again, in maybe a different setting, would have meant that he was out on his ear, right. And so he was very, very behind in a lot of his writing assignments and all of this, but he had this idea to build, and I hope I'm not misremembering, but there's a certain kind of a shrimp that is very difficult to keep this shrimp in a tank because it's so destructive, right? And he had this goal that he wanted to create a tank that would be able to contain this, and so thinking of the symbolism of this, by the way, is pretty insane because, as I say, this kid was having his own, issues really.
Right. Fitting in the tank. Yeah, staying in the tank.
Exactly, right. So he came in to meet with me about the project, and so I said, go and look at the materials you would need to do this and then come back and talk to me. And so he did that, and it was, thousands of dollars to build this. And so I said, well, that doesn't mean that the idea or the project stops here. Why don't you do a GoFundMe campaign and, to see if you can raise money for this? And now if you go to an English language arts, sort of idea, you see what happens. I have now created a situation where he needs to think about his audience. He needs to think about the purpose. And I, in fact, had him writing 3 different GoFundMe page things. One would be directed to people he knows very well, grandma and family, and another one addressed to his friends, and another one addressed just to the general public. And suddenly the kid's doing all of the writing that I would ever want him to do and more. I can now assess those same skills that he was not able to, flex in his English class at the time. And that's what I mean when I say the nimbleness,
right.
The ability for a school to respond in that way. It just can be difficult to do, and I think we have the luxury, and the benefit here with our faculty and our program to be able to do a lot of that.
When you have so many students and you have a curriculum that has to be followed, you don't have the flexibility, let alone the time, to have kids doing different projects. And sometimes gifted programs can kind of fill some of those needs, but they're not always in depth enough to allow some of those lagging skills to then catch up.
Exactly. It's the strengths that you can leverage for the purpose of that area where students do need to develop.
Why don't you tell us a little bit more? You've used that term strengths-based a couple of times. So tell us a little bit more about what that is.
Well, at the core of it, it's really maintaining a culture that, prides itself on providing opportunities and resources for talent development. Lopez and Luis have a synopsis of 5 principles to define a strength-based education, which I think is really good as sort of a touchstone. And that's first that when you're understanding a student, be it through, an assessment or a typical maybe academic or even behavioral data, you really do need to put student strengths at the forefront. Relatedly, teachers really should be tapping those strengths to individualize and to personalize the curriculum. And we just had an example with the student with the tank. And then in more of a broad way, there should really be a culture, and the discourse of the school should be celebrating strengths. And it's funny, something just happened today that I thought, I've got to use this on the podcast. My security guard came up to me, and just to describe him a little bit, I mean, he's a sweet man, maybe his late 50s. He's worked with us for about 10 years. He, takes his job of keeping order very, very seriously. He calls me Superman because I wore Superman socks once in 2010, and it sticks. So, just an incredible little guy. But he came up to me to say, so-and-so student, they were late today, and the door was locked. So he had to knock there for a while, and I came down and I opened up the door, and the student was a little harried, and he started to tell me about how maybe we should replace the system, and instead of the locks, we should do some sort of a passkey thing that would only turn on and off at certain times a day. And I told him, you should really go and talk to Chris about that. And I thought, wonderful. Yeah. Because this is our security guard, who is a very, critical part of maintaining a strength-based culture, because he saw this kid, which could be interpreted as, this kid's late. This is the excuse now that the key wasn't, right. But he went the other way. And it was, that's a great idea.
I know teachers in the public school setting don't have the luxury to make these big wholesale changes in their school's curriculum or, policies to move it toward a more strengths-based setting. With that in mind, what tips or advice would you give them to move in that general direction?
Sure. Well, I mean, if it's in the context of maybe a student in a class with a teacher, what I might suggest is that, there would be the ability to advocate to be able to do certain types of things. And just an aside, I mean, at Bridges, when we talk about, the adaptive skills, self-advocacy is just way up on the list. And so I think what parents at other schools could do is, help build and instill the confidence in their students so that there is first, they understand that they're valuable and they have something to offer, and they're able to, say, hey, I'm in this class and I'm asked to do this, and I wonder if I could do this different thing to fulfill the assignment because, it's more aligned with the way that I, can engage in this class. So certainly being able to have those conversations. And what's nice is I think anywhere, educators have good hearts and they love kids and they're interested in learning. So I don't think that you're going to run up against a wall necessarily because you have a creative idea for a different way to do something,
I know working with twice exceptional kids, we often have a lot of that asynchronous development where, we have these cognitive skills and then we have the emotional regulation skills, and that, there's so many issues, executive functioning, all these different things that are going on, depending on a child's specific diagnosis, whether that's ADHD or autism or dyslexia, whatever it might be. And so I feel like a lot of times when kids have that asynchronous development, it sometimes manifests as disciplinary issues.
Sure. Do
you see that? How does that look at your school? And, what works with those kids?
Well, it's interesting. This also circles back to your question about, how students end up at Bridges. Oftentimes there is, a lot of data about various behavioral issues that happened. And so as far as what, works, and it's funny, my background puts this in an interesting sort of a tilt. My academic background is in philosophy, and I think the best way to frame what that has done to my brain is through a Steve Martin bit where he says, when you go to college and you major in something like history, you go through and your facts and your details and you have all this wonderful things in your head, and then, 6 months later you remember about 20% of it. And, but I, Steve Martin says, I was a philosophy major, so there aren't any, stats or facts or details. It's all ideas. So I graduate, and then 6 months later, I remember just enough to screw me up for the rest of my life. And so in my case, I would say that I remember just enough to stand a fighting chance of, keeping up with 2E kids.
Right.
And the way that manifests in a disciplinary, sort of situation, again, is probably best characterized by a story. But I had a student who was on the spectrum, very, very rigid, and also there was a lot of anger in there that he was working really closely with a therapist with. And to give you an idea of his rigidity, in a class, he had turned in an assignment that was the first paragraph of a Wikipedia entry. And when we talked to him, hey, do we have an academic honesty, topic on our hands? His response was, no, that's incredible. Like, that has got to be the most coincidental thing in the world that I, did that. And so we let it sit for, a week. And then I went back and said, hey, could we open that up again? And he stuck to his guns. So I think it's the, that is the extent to which he was not able to accept accountability for things, and B, really, could not lose face. And so an interesting thing, ended up happening there. He would end up in my office a lot, and for a whole variety of disciplinary things. And it was his response was always, "It's their fault." Even if he did something that was egregious, well, that's their fault that they reacted that way. Mm-hmm. As you might expect, this student was also just frighteningly brilliant, just profoundly gifted on the tests, and just incredible. And so, at a certain point, I just started throwing various isms at him. If you've taken an intro philosophy class, you must have heard of the mean between the extremes. Mm-hmm. And the more and more I started to throw that idea out with this student, he developed an affinity, probably because it was unpleasant for him to do good, mm-hmm. where he started to really engage then in, okay, I do see that there is, an extent to which that this isn't about me. It's about order in a larger sense. And order, can be very, very important to students on the spectrum. So anytime anything would happen, instead of 40 minutes of why it wasn't his fault, we had installed a very esoteric vocabulary that allowed me to really get right to the issue with him, and be able to help him understand and accept why what it was that he did, wasn't the best choice. So I guess the approach then, and the best way to work with 2E students, is equal parts restorative and reflective, and with Steve Martin's theoretical framework, because I can assure you, if any philosophy professor heard what I just said, they would probably have a lot of holes to poke in it, but certainly got a kid to accept,
It sounds like part of that was allowing the behavior to be separate from the student.
Yeah.
Where he's not internalizing that and feeling like, I'm bad. You're telling me that I'm a bad person because I copied and pasted this paragraph or whatever the situation might be.
Right.
And you can kind of step outside of it to look at it objectively, so they're not backed in a corner. I feel like that's where a lot of that trouble with those 2E kids comes. It's like they end up feeling like they're backed in a corner, and then they just dig in, and they don't always have that cognitive flexibility to either negotiate their way out or let it go either.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
A huge part of what you're talking about is that relationship building.
That's where, hiring of faculty becomes incredibly important at a 2E school, because in addition to, the certifications and all of that, there really has to be something about the person that is also, very able to, have a mindset where there's a real appreciation for, how neurological complexities can manifest and what that means. To look from that at another direction, I find that a lot of our teachers are not only teachers, but have, they're very creative people who spend a lot of time outside of school on their own personally meaningful projects, and anything from writers to musicians, and a lot of our faculty before they came to us actually had a very rich professional career in their discipline outside of education. And so I mention this all in the context of relationship building because our students really glom onto that. It's even better when your beginning music student starts to develop a relationship with a faculty member, with a mentor who runs a studio, outside of school. And so now get back to your wonderful point about, an authentic place where things can develop organically. When you've got two people who are, fired up about music, the relationship that can form there, is actually quite impactful. So thinking about, what is the best type of faculty member who will be able to just naturally and exude as a part of who they are, that sort of mindset and, fertile territory for these very, valuable and meaningful relationships. And our kids come back a lot after they graduate to see this teacher or that. But we have a young woman who graduated probably 4 years ago now, and she did all the illustrations for the book of another of our teachers that she had in an Econ Gov class. So, there's just, this wonderful place where relationships actually can be developed around shared interests and even, as I say, shared projects.
Talk a little about your Young Expert program.
When I talk about a strength-based school needing to devote as much time as possible to talent development, really the Young Expert program is the centerpiece of that. And in brief, students during their 10th, 11th, and 12th grade years really get to choose anything that they want to do. And then facilitated by faculty coaches, they first explore that area in great depth, and by the 12th grade, if they have done a number of projects, in that topic area, they receive on their high school diplomas this, Young Expert certification. And so a student who really thrived in that program, when he was in the 10th grade, he was interested in psychology. And so he started, reading psychology textbooks, and really did a lot of work there. And he ended up putting together sort of a TED Talk that really didn't go any further than his own computer. And then he decided, okay, I'm going to move to something else. What he moved to then was artificial intelligence. And that's really where he took off. He was also a student who, was in all of our advanced computer programming classes. So he had that as a part of, his interests and his developing expertise. And so over the course then of really exploring in great detail, artificial intelligence, which of course is, a cutting edge industry right now, he started to reach out to just, anybody that he could to, put together another TED Talk, which, this time he actually submitted it to a TED Ed, which was nice too, because he was actually then invited to New York because they enjoyed it. And I'm kind of a nerd about the news, so I, know a lot of various things that are going on. And I'm looking at his slides, and I'm seeing names of people that I had just seen quoted in like the Economist special section on artificial intelligence. And I was just saying, how did you get in contact with these people? And he goes, I just didn't stop, He just kept going on and on and on. And so there was just a, pretty amazing drive there. And so when he graduated, his Young Expert certification was in artificial intelligence. And I think very, very, fortunately and probably expectedly, his first year at college, he was just blowing professors' minds. And he was invited to be on a research team that is something that's reserved for, people who are juniors and seniors, and he was in his first year. And I mean, there are many, many things I think to credit for that, and most of them are his own work and his incredible, intelligence and capacity. But certainly another aspect of that is, we built into his school day a place where he could do this. We built into our school day a place where he could pursue this interest in artificial intelligence. And even people who moved into, college and had a computer science major, well, they had their own experiences, but they didn't have that experience to play. Right. And to just explore and be supported by faculty coaches. And so as far as success story, that's certainly one that makes me very happy.
So you got the opportunity to deepen your connection with Twice-Exceptionality recently as well.
Oh, yeah. We were really just so delighted to be able to take over the 2E Twice Exceptional newsletter, which was started by Mark Bade and Linda Newman, who I think a lot of people are familiar with as really just amazing drivers, behind the 2E movement, and that they were experiencing 2E issues with their 2E children really before there even was this word called Twice Exceptional, and just started networking with parents and meeting, researchers and academics who were interested in these things, and that eventually grew into a newsletter that really became a staple, for a lot of parents, and, a lot of wonderful voices of, people in gifted ed, of, psychologists who work with gifted kids. And so they decided to retire that after 17 years of running that. And we were contacted, and they basically said, would Bridges like to take over 2E News? And we said, yes, absolutely. And we then transferred that to the online format, and we refresh our content every week. We put out a print magazine twice a year, which is called Variations, and our tagline is "Not all great minds think alike."
Love it.
And we really have, all of the same voices, and are adding more and more every day in the articles that go out. And our mission is, I think similar to the work that you're doing, in that we just want to provide valuable information and perspectives to really support twice exceptional kids, to support gifted kids, and kids who do have, specific learning needs. And we're really just thrilled about the opportunity to do it. And it's been a real labor of love here so far. We took over in November, and so far everything's going really well.
Yeah. So how can people get in touch if they're interested?
Oh, sure. Visiting www.2enews.com, and that's where we are. And you can look into signing up and getting a subscription and all of that.
Chris Wiebe, managing editor of 2E News and director of the high school program at Bridges Academy in Studio City, California. Thanks for the chat.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
We feel like 2E News is a really great resource for parents and educators and counselors. So if you're interested in a subscription, they're offering a discount for Mind Matters listeners. Just enter the code MindMatters, all lowercase, one word, for $10 off your annual subscription. More to come in just a minute.
On a recent episode of Mind Matters.
Acceleration is one of those things that I feel like a lot of people know about, but not a lot of people know a lot about.
There are actually at least 20 different forms of acceleration. Early admission to kindergarten or first grade, certainly skipping a grade somewhere in the middle, early entrance to college, graduating from college early. But then there's also subject matter acceleration.
What are some of the myths about acceleration that you'd like to dispel?
The idea that an accelerated student will be some type of a social misfit.
Missing an opportunity to change someone's educational experience for the better leaves questions of what if?
Let's really think that over. Not accelerating or not doing anything is a decision.
That's episode 11, available at mindmatterspodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
2E kids. We could call our twice exceptional kiddos late bloomers. Maybe asynchronous development is to blame, or maybe it's because we stick them in an environment that doesn't fit. When you do find a place that allows their strengths to flourish, and you give them the nourishment of a deep and personal path, all of those things are eventually going to come into sync. Adults who see past their struggles can provide these opportunities and watch these kids come into their own. The timeline might need adjusting, the trajectory might be different, but they will get to where they're going. Strengths-based instruction might seem counterintuitive to some. Remediating the weaknesses may seem like the most important thing to address first, but there's no faster way to kill a passion for learning than by only focusing on a student's struggles. I don't know about you, but I sure don't want to spend all day thinking about the things I'm bad at doing. Finding community and support is necessary. Yes, for our students, but also for the adults who work with and love them. Many of us can't afford a specialized school tuition. Many of us don't even have such a school in our area, and homeschooling can be hard to make work. But actively seeking resources, support, and understanding, whether through listening to podcasts or finding resources like TUI News or connecting in person with like-minded parents and teachers for support, can be a lifeline. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and we'll see you on the next Mind Matters.
We're all building bridges slowly, tearing them down fast to start over. We're all trying to come over memories of the past and start over. The past can start over. Start over.
Thanks for listening to the Mind Matters podcast. To learn more about us and our mission, go to mindmatterspodcast.com. You can find us on Apple iTunes, Google Play, or anywhere podcasts are available. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a positive review. We're also on Twitter at Mind Matters Pod, and on Facebook and Instagram, it's Mind Matters Podcast. If you'd like to help keep us moving forward, consider making a monthly contribution at patreon.com/mindmatters. The executive producer of Mind Matters is me, Dave Morris. And on behalf of everyone here, thanks for listening. Mind Matters is a production of Morris Creative Services.